Hi, I'm Ralph Preston, and William Lowe and I are back to have another roadmap discussion. And this time it's going to be on balance and some techniques that we both use to help with our balance and our recoveries. So I'm going to give you some basics first and then some more advanced techniques. So William, what do we got for start off with for basics in balance recovery?
Well, I think when it comes to recovery after stroke, especially when it comes to balance, it's really important to get back to the fundamentals or or the foundations of how you actually learn to regain your balance in your recovery after stroke. And the reason why I say this is because a lot of stroke survivors, when they start off their journey in recovery after stroke, unfortunately, because of the way that the healthcare system is structured and maybe their experience of treatment they received in hospital, they're not they're not very well supported in regaining their sense of balance. And what this inevitably results in is stroke survivors a couple of years down the track feeling like they're walking like they're drunk whenever they're attempting to walk, or feeling like they're walking underwater, or that one leg is a lot heavier than the other. And obviously, this stops them being able to achieve their best potential recovery, especially when it comes to being able to actually return to walking in a safe manner. So I think when it comes to regaining your sense of balance, like I said, it's really important to revisit the fundamentals or foundational work, which you should have really focused on when you first started your journey in recovery after stroke. And the exercises I highly recommend for regaining your sense of balance and really teach your brain the correct way of regaining its sense of balance are your bridges and your squats. And the reason why I say bridges and squats is because both of these exercises really give your brain the experience of what it feels like to distribute balance or or the weight of its body across both of your legs correctly. So for example, with your bridges as an exercise, the intention of the bridge is to teach your brain how to learn how to distribute the weight of the body across both legs in a lying down position. And what this does is this actually translates to walking, where you're able to actually apply what your brain has learned while performing the bridge exercise and use those muscles which are trained when it was doing the bridge exercise. Because when you're doing bridges, what the muscles you're training are a lot of the muscles which are relevant when it comes to walking, such as your core muscles or your tummy or stomach muscles, as well as your glutes and as well as your hip extensors at the same time. So that's why I think bridges are really important. But the problem with bridges is that, especially when it comes to recovery after stroke in the early stages, it can be very easy to do them wrong. And bridges only work when they're done correctly. And the reason why I say that it's easy to do them wrong is because, especially when you're just starting out your journey after stroke, it can be very tempting to use your non-affected leg to do most of the work when you're doing these exercises such as bridges. So one thing I recommend to really teach your brain how to regain its sense of balance is to give it a sense of whether or not it's doing the exercise correctly. So when it comes to bridges, one thing I teach a lot of my paying clients is to use a squishy ball and actually place it between both of your legs when you're doing a bridge exercise to give your brain a sense of whether or not it's doing it correctly. If you're able to pinch the ball and keep it between both legs when you're performing a bridge and not dropping it, that means that you're able to teach your brain how to distribute equal weight across both legs correctly. Whereas if you drop the ball, that means that you're using your non-affected leg a little bit more than you should, and you're not doing the bridge correctly. So that's just one. So that's just one way of, I guess, teaching your brain the correct way to regain its sense of balance in your recovery after stroke, so that further down the road, you won't be in a situation where you're feeling like you're walking as if you're drunk, or you're feeling as if one leg is a lot heavier than the other, or you feel like you're walking underwater, as one stroke survivor has told me once. Now, having said that, I also mentioned squats. I think squats is a staple exercise which every stroke survivor should use to regain their sense of balance. Reason being is because when you're actually doing a squat, when you think about it, you're teaching your brain how to distribute equal weight across both of your legs from a seated to a standing up position. And this is going to be very important when it comes to walking, because obviously the muscles which help you to maintain a position of standing, they're also used when it comes to walking and regaining your sense of balance. So when it comes to doing your squats, you're training a lot of your glute muscles as well as a lot of some of the muscles at the front of your knee as well. But the most important thing with squats is that it's very important to teach your brain how to actually control the muscles around the knee at the same time. So one thing a lot of stroke survivors experience in their recovery after stroke when they're first trying to do a squat is that their knee tends to hyperextend when they want to actually stand up from a seated position. But the best way to actually do a squat is to actually do it in such a way so that you're stopping yourself at that point just before your knee is about to hyperextend. And what this might mean is that you don't go all the way to the top or stand all the way straight up when you're doing your squat, but rather you might stand up halfway at that point just before you feel as if your knee is about to hyperextend. Because when it comes to balance and when it comes to returning to walking, as myself and Ralph talked about in our other roadmap segment, being able to teach your brain how to control the muscles around the knee, such that you don't experience that hyperextension of the knee, is really important to when it comes to returning to walking and also regaining your sense of balance as well. So those are two staple exercises which I believe every stroke survivor should use in their recovery after stroke when it comes to not just developing the correct sense of balance, but also helping them to progress towards walking independently with or without a cane. Now, Ralph, I do understand that you and I had a discussion about some of the things or exercises you did to help regain your sense of balance when it came to recovery after stroke. I'm wondering, would you be able to share some of those and just exchange some notes with what I just shared?
Sure. Well, I was listening to you, it occurred to me that I wasn't really working on balance, but I worked on leg strength and good walking, and I found, in thinking about it, that the more stronger that side was, the better my balance seemed to be. Maybe because I was getting closer and closer in terms of strength. I did a lot of. I didn't start doing bridges for a number of years after my stroke. I wish I had. I didn't know the importance of core like I do now. So that would be something to mention. Core strength is really important to balance, especially because if you have a weak core, you can't. You're trying to learn where that center point is. That they talk about the string that comes out of your head. So you're trying to learn where that is. So if your core is not strong, it's hard, makes it a lot harder to recover back to that point. So I did a couple of things. I did some at the counter. I always make sure I have something to grab or hold on to. And I would do simple weight shifting. In the beginning, it was like weight bearing and weight shifting. It also displaces you a little bit, and you always have the counter to grab onto. A lot of what I did was kind of move through things in a safe way and try and learn where up was again. I've also done this with knee stands with stroke survivors who are working on standing up, building up core strength and balance. So if you're not yet walking, that's one thing you can do. If you do a knee stand, then you're again imagining that string coming out of your head. And just like on land, I practice posture. You can practice upper torso posture in a knee stand. And I jokingly said to the physical therapist I was working with at the time, when she gets good at these, what are we going to do? Bop her a little bit? And he said, exactly. and and because you're basically in balance, you're trying to learn where that straight up point is again. So, like I said, I did some weight shifting. I also tried balancing on my affected leg at the counter. Um, so that's pretty good. Also, you can hold on and close your eyes and like let go, but know where the counter is and try and move around. Um, One thing you could do, we do that kind of motion was just doing, just occurred to me in adaptive yoga class, going both ways, getting the lumbar spine and the hips opened up. Um, that's a good way, especially if you have something to hold on to because you're seated in a chair. And so, again, I did a lot of things where, you have to recover back to the center point and standing. So I, knew I was holding my head up straight. At first, I didn't. In fact, I've gotten better at it, a lot better at it over the years. So I did posture, things that in a safe way that moved me off center to learn how to get back to center. I did a lot of sit to stands, which are squats, basically. And my way of dealing with hyperextension was I worked on it some because I knew it was a problem, and we talked about that in another segment, working on it, getting close. But if you, like you were saying, if you're doing a sit stand, you just stay a few degrees away from it. Don't even get that close. Do it sometime when you're working on the knee, not on standing up and balance. So, and I found that the stronger I got and the more I walked, combined with all the things I just mentioned, I think I got more. To me, it was always about getting my left side to kind of match my right side again, and the closer that came, the better my balance seemed to be. So, work everything.
Yeah, and I also like what you mentioned about always getting your brain to correct itself when it comes to your balance, because that actually reminded me of a really important factor when it comes to regaining a sense of balance after stroke, in that you want to, I mean, obviously squats and bridges are good, but they will only get you to a certain level of balance before those exercises no longer cease to be challenging to the brain. So once you're at that stage, in order to keep improving your brain sense of balance, what you're going to have to do is you're going to actually have to apply what your brain has learned from those staple exercises, so your bridges and your squats, and expose your brain to experiences where you're actually where you're intentionally disrupting your brain's sense of balance and teaching itself to correct itself so that it can actually learn how to regain its sense of balance a lot more. And I like how you mentioned those exercises with your core, because when it comes to regaining a sense of balance, developing your core muscles is actually very important to this, which is why if you've ever run a marathon or if you've ever sprinted quite a lot before your stroke, you might have noticed that some of your stomach muscles hurt. And the reason being is because a lot of your core muscles, they actually help your brain to distribute that weight across from your affected leg over to your non-affected leg, so that you can get into more of a rhythm whenever you're walking, and also have a more efficient gait. So with that being said, I just want to add on to what you mentioned about some of the exercises you were doing to teach your brain how to regain your sense of balance by working the core. Some advanced exercises you could do once you develop those foundations using your squats and bridge exercises are just exercises which target different muscles, such as your core muscles. For example, one exercise I know of is actually being able to do being able to bend your knees and sit on the floor, and then trying to move side to side in that position. And what this does is because you're on both your knees in a prayer position on the floor, what you're doing is you're actually teaching your brain how to regain its sense of balance in a really awkward position where it's more likely to lose its balance. And because you're intentionally disrupting your brain by putting it in a position where you've bent both knees on the floor, what this does is it actually exposes your brain to a really tricky situation where it has to adapt itself to learn how to regain its sense of balance and really focus on how to actually make those connections to learn how to regain its sense of balance like it used to before. Because doing an exercise where you're kneeling on the floor, you're, like I mentioned, you are more likely to lose your balance. However, if you can teach your brain how to calibrate itself and get back into a position where it's center and it's able to stabilize itself, then this will also translate to regaining a better sense of balance when it comes to your walking, and also when it comes to just your whole recovery as a whole. So everything, I guess, comes together, like you mentioned, Ralph, working everything. I think if you can tackle stroke recovery or regaining your balance after stroke from different angles, then it's going to result in a very desirable outcome and also a lot of progress in your recovery after stroke. And I guess I just want to hand it over to Ralph if he has anything else to add along with some of the core strengthening exercises I just mentioned.
Well, no, I'd just say, core is how you get back to that central point. If you think about, one of the most important things about balance is not falling. If you think about the times you almost fell, it's usually something unexpected. You put your foot down and it twists, or it goes deeper or not as steep as you think, or you catch your toe on something or other. Anyway, you've always whatever. I pay attention when I don't fall. So you've got to be able to deal with that little unexpected thing and get back to where is up. And I mean, core is just key to that. We're both talking about knee stands. That they are just a really good way. And the person I mentioned earlier had ataxia, and she flailed around a lot, had very little trunk strength until we built up her core, and then she didn't, and she got her balance from doing that also. And shortly thereafter, a couple months later, we started doing standing and working on standing, not holding on to anything. That's something else. I just thought about it because that's one thing I did with Kelly. I got a walker and I sandbagged it, and she would do a sit to stand to it, and I had her on a gait belt, and she would let go. And of course, it takes two people, but if you have somebody that's willing to do it for you, that's a really good way. Just because it's also kind of confidence building, because that's not something you'll jump into or should jump into on your own. Because you need to have a plan in case you lose your balance that you don't fall, and another person in gait belt provide that. Anyway, so that was one way that, after she got that sense of what's up and the ability to recover, we just started working on doing it standing up. And after she got that, then we started working on walking. So, like a lot of things, again, it's kind of a progression. And eyes closed is something that you and I have talked about a little bit. You can do there's some techniques and things that you can do with your eyes closed or to challenge your walking. I guess we should say at this point we're now going to be talking a little bit in the remaining time we have about some advanced techniques, and you shouldn't be thinking about doing these unless you can walk pretty decent or stand on, do a sit to stand pretty good without your eyes shut. So let's see, I'll leave a couple for you, William, but one thing I did was I noticed that I would, if I looked at somebody or something, a mailbox or something, that it disoriented me a lot post after my stroke and my recovery walking. And so I talked to a therapist about it. And they said, well, do different things. Look at different things while you're walking. So I did that at first. And then I went to the beach because I'd rather fall in the sand or in the shallow water than on the concrete. And I would look both ways while I was walking. I'd also walk backwards and I'd also shut my eyes. I also train myself, this is a different subject, but everybody tends to look down. It takes a long time to look up. I also train myself to look at the horizon. And when I was doing that, I would sometimes close my eyes. And then I knew where my head would be. I'd look at the horizon, close my eyes, and keep walking. It's a little scary at first, but when you get it, it really improves your whole sense of walking. It's funny because about no matter how much you practice it, you don't get really that great at talking to somebody and walking that way at the same time. I can do it, but it's tricky. So those are a couple things I did. What kinds of other advanced stuff did you do, William?
Yeah, so Ralph, I like what you mentioned about closing your eyes, because that definitely reminded me of some of the things I used to I guess regain my sense of balance when it came to recovery after stroke. I think closing your eyes is a really powerful one, because I don't think we realize it, but our brains actually rely a lot on our sense of sight in order to do a lot of the things which we would typically do when it comes to walking, such as regaining our sense of balance, or actually knowing our sense of balance. And when you actually take away your brain's ability to see or process what it's looking at, what you're actually essentially doing when it comes to your recovery is you're putting your brain in a situation where you're forcing itself to really work on its internal system of sensing its own sense of balance, and developing this so that it can get a lot better at some of the exercises or some of the skills which you're trying to learn in your recovery after stroke. So I first just want to preface this by saying that I think that developing or regaining your sense of balance after stroke, I think you should be dipping your toes in the water every now and then to see how much balance you've actually gotten back and how good you are at correcting your own sense of balance. And by no means should you be dipping yourself, or I guess jumping straight into the pool, until you've at least, like Ralph said, been able to walk by yourself quite well, and you're able to do the squats and bridges quite well, or at a very competent level. But with that being said, I think closing your eyes is a really good thing you can do when it comes to your recovery after stroke, because it can really force your brain to develop a certain sense of balance. One thing I did in my recovery was what I like to call the tandem stance balance test. And you can do this with your eyes open or eyes closed. But basically, what you would do is you would stand in a tandem stance. So basically, what this means is that you would stand in a position where both of your feet are close together, and then you're just facing straight. You're just looking at a wall, or you're just looking out to the window. And while you're in this position, what you would do is you would tilt your head to the right, to the left, and then you would move your head up, and then you would move your head down. And what this would do when you do this quickly is you would actually disrupt your brain's internal center of balance, or your brain's or your brain's vestibular system, which is the scientific term for it, which is right between your ears. And it would actually put you in a situation where you're likely to lose your balance. But the goal of this exercise is to actually teach your brain how to actually not lose its sense of balance after you've moved your head in those directions, but teach it to maintain the stance so that you're not disrupted by that sudden change in your balance. Because what happens when you move your head in different directions is it creates a very challenging condition for your brain to try and overcome. And obviously, you want to have your hand hovering over something close by in case you do fall, which is another thing I mentioned. Obviously, with all your squats and with all your bridges, like I said, dipping your toes in the water. If you want to regain your sense of balance, every now and then you do want to try and stand up from a seated position, but have your hand hover over something which you can hold on to and have a plan, as Ralph said, in case things don't go as well as you intended to. But I mean, I think closing your eyes is a very advanced technique. And you don't just have to do it with the tandem stance exercise, which I just mentioned. You can also do it with your squats as well, which is even more challenging when you're closing your eyes because you're moving your body through I guess one motion, and you're trying to register where your body is in space. But all in all, I think when it comes to regaining your sense of balance, like I mentioned, it's about being creative about how you tackle and how you expose your brain to different variations of how to regain its own sense of balance, whether this be closing your eyes and forcing your brain to rely on the sources of information it does have, such as being able to feel the ground with its feet, with your feet, sorry, or actually just feel its sense of position, or just, I guess, putting your brain in situations where it's really targeting that core, and you're trying to get your brain to regain its sense of balance in an awkward position. So I guess that's everything I have to add when it comes to closing your eyes. But like I mentioned, it's a very advanced technique, and by no means should you be starting off in your recovery after stroke and jumping straight into closing your eyes when it comes to walking or when it comes to doing these exercises, because you would be putting yourself at risk of falling when you're doing those. And like I said, it's very important to just always revisit the fundamentals, dipping your toes in the water to test how much progress you've made when it comes to regaining your sense of balance after stroke, and then building from there accordingly until you get to a place where you feel as if you're able to regain your sense of balance as well as you had before you had your stroke.
Two things, and we'll wrap it up. One is I would stand on my affected leg, and I would put my hands on the counter and then try and lift them up, go to a light touch. Then I'd take them up and have fingers down, so if I lost my balance, I could just touch and try and maintain that balance with the affected leg. First of all, it's good weight bearing on the affected leg. Also, it's learning where that center is. The other thing, this is also kind of back more in the beginning. I thought about it when you were talking about closing your eyes. We're much more visually dependent post-stroke. I know I am. One of the things that bothers me the most is would be having to walk across my backyard in the pitch black dark, because I have no references. So one of the things that I find is if you're working on balance and you're letting go and you've got your eyes open still, have things like, well, I got it in the background, like those windows are up and down, the pictures going this way, the door frame, the corner. We're more dependent on the verticals and the horizontals and that visual input. So I think it's a good idea to have some horizontals and verticals in your field of vision if you're working on balance. You can find them anywhere, a corner. So, you have anything else, William, or otherwise we'll wrap this up?
Not really. I mean, like I said, I think when it comes to regaining your sense of balance, it's always about dipping your toes in the water, actually trying to measure how much progress you've made with your balance, because it's not something which is going to happen overnight, but it's a gradual process, I guess, of exposing your brain to situations where it's losing its balance and teaching your brain how to correct itself and learn how to regain its sense of balance. Because I think when it comes to returning to walking, balance plays a big role in how you're able to walk and how much of a rhythm you're able to get into when it comes to your walking. And if you're able to, I guess, just have a look at how much progress you're making, whether this be week by week or month by month, then you will know how to change things accordingly to allow your brain to continue to see more changes until you get to that place where you feel as if you've regained your balance enough for you to live your best life possible in your recovery after stroke or life after stroke.
Okay. Well, it sounds like our takeaways are work on building up strength in your affected side, and in doing so, do it in a way like with the ball and the bridges, where you're teaching your brain how to about balance between the two sides, because that's going to translate to balance when you stand up, and then work some on like knowing where center is and being able to get back to that position. Sounds simple enough, but takes a good bit of work, as you and I both know. So we'll see everybody on the next one of these shortly. Thanks for tuning in.